Everyone, it's Alex, and with May being short story month, I wanted to give some recommendations. As far as collections go, I feel like I could right off the bat easily recommend things like Interpreter of Maladies by Jhumpa Lahiri, or also Lot by Brian Washington, but between both of those, I feel like I've talked about them enough recently on my channel, so for today I wanted to mention some backlist short story collections that I wanted to recommend that I maybe haven't talked about in a really long time. And up first is actually a collection that I have a couple of stories left from that I'm reading this month, and that's Cool for America by Andrew Martin. I read Andrew Martin's novel Early Work a couple of years ago and really liked it. And incidentally, it is a book that had my date recognize me from whenever I talked about it on BookTube, which is kind of funny because I feel like that occurrence is like one of the plot lines possibly that could be in an Andrew Martin story. To me, I think Andrew Martin is just really in touch with how 20-somethings and 30-somethings just interact with each other. That does enhance a feeling of cynicism, but it's never really in a self-deprecating way. And thanks to Martin's expert way of having punchlines and a sense of humor, in some ways the stories here do feel a bit sitcom-y, but like in a really good way. So I would really recommend this as just a really light and breezy collection if you want a good laugh and also some really effective storytelling. Up next I have When Watched by Leopoldine. In a similar vein as Andrew Martin, these stories do deal with a lot of like 20 to 30 somethings, and if I remember correctly, this collection takes place mostly in New York City. And Core really knows how to use setting as a playground of diving into the expectations of a scene or a premise, but morphing that into something a bit more tender and something with like a more observational way of showing empathy. What I do like a lot about these stories is that they often try to portray something involving a romantic relationship or a connection, but it's never entirely meant to be within those boundaries of our conceptions of romance. Instead, more playing at sort of the boundaries of intimacy in general. Unfortunately, though, to me, this collection isn't really like anything very voice driven. I don't think it's exactly a standout with the technical aspects of writing that's very memorable to me. But I really did love digesting these stories more consecutively by sort of reading them all together versus separately. Also, however, this next thing I'm about to say might make you feel. Core's writing really reminds me of Sally Rooney, and I don't mean that as like a baity way or anything, but in a way that I like Rooney's short stories a lot more. Core's collection really reminded me of sort of the potential of what Rooney could have if she stuck more to short stories, since I prefer them over her novels. And again, I don't mean that as a baity blurb or anything, but I really just love how both Rooney and Core talk about romantic relationships by sort of planting this seed of doubt and really indulging in that doubt for the characters and how that makes them feel. And between the both of them, how I feel like they do a really good job at trying to look toward this really big desire toward human connection. Up next, I wanted to recommend the stories of Breece DJ Pancake. Pancake is a local legend in the writing world back in my hometown or home state of West Virginia. In his stories, Pancake writes very detailed in a way of talking about the back roads and the trails of my hometown that I'm familiar with, really using these sort of fake pseudonyms of particular towns that I know he's talking about. So on one hand, that does give me the bias of enjoying the stories that way. But objectively, I would really stand by saying that Pancake really knows how to vividly capture the mood of a character's sense of being, especially in relation to a place, especially thinking of places like West Virginia. And what I really love especially how Pancake is able to make these characters revolve, or the epicenter of their lives feeling like it's consumed by labor. Often Pancake stories having their characters really interact with their relationship with work. And this feels really apt because West Virginia to me has always been a place that even now still feels really stuck in time, as these characters portray themselves as champions of adversity and how they always constantly shapeshift and adapt to whatever situation they may face, which feels, you know, very much the sort of value of Appalachia. I found this collection to be surprisingly moving in some points, not only from my recognition of certain things that Pancake is talking about, but again, just capturing that essence of what it means to be from Appalachia that I think was done so masterfully. Unfortunately, Breece DJ Pancake did commit suicide when he was very young. I think he was 26, so he does live in sort of this shadow of what could have been, and I feel like unfortunately, with his passing, it is sort of the symptom of maybe possibly the very nature of what it means to come from that sort of place, and really the mindset possibly of sort of, again, the more impoverished area of West Virginia and other things like that. Other than me trying to even imagine why Breece DJ Pancake would have done that, which I'm not trying to do at all. But I think his writing is just so vivid and wonderful, and I really wish he would have had time to have been able to write more. But I'm really so thankful for what we have. My second to last recommendation is A Manual for Cleaning Women by Lucia Berlin. What really caused me to be absorbed by these stories is just how Berlin is able to make each character feel like they're really indulging in their own idleness. It really felt like characters would take this conscious time to identify their space within their relationship with work and family. But those light bulb moments, in turn, really made it feel like that's whenever the story was really starting to begin, putting characters in a position of being more accountable for how they react to these new ideas of what they think about their life and their position in life. And what's great is that Berlin is able to really emphasize this thematic patience, almost as if the character at a point in the story always desires to collaborate with the theme of the story before it can just bestow itself upon the character, if that even makes sense. Without relying too much on symbolic gestures or really just a character sort of talking in circles, which I feel like is sometimes a thing that can happen with short stories. I think really what I'm trying to say is that Berlin does just a really great job at executing her stories. And I would dare say that Berlin is an essential short story writer if anyone is really interested in the form. So I would really consider picking this up. And finally, I want to recommend How to Breathe Underwater by Julie Orringer. I remember reading this book and finding it to be a complete knockout. Like, I think literally loving every single story in this collection, which is super rare. Many of these stories do revolve around children and teenagers. I want to say maybe aged between 10 to maybe 20. And I think what Orringer really captures really well is really proving, like, every teenager probably feeling like those years of their teenhood are the most formative in their life, which makes sense because they're literally only teens, so they don't have anything to compare it to. But what I was really looking for in these stories is not only the sense of the story itself, if it's interesting, which it always is, but Orringer always takes this care and consideration towards adolescence and never undermining that experience through the lens of these characters. To be honest, some of the subject matter in here can be really grim and melancholic. There are things like death, illness, and grief. So using that as a contrast of these themes very likely being these teens' first exposure to this kind of heavy stuff really does also reflect on the reader feeling more present in the stories itself. And I don't want to confuse anyone by saying that this is like YA or anything, because it definitely is not young adult, because Orringer really makes sure to still give that literary fiction perspective of being so refreshing, sort of having this subject matter but talking about it through these younger characters. And with most of the stories all situated within like small town suburbia or just small towns in general, it really does give that personal touch of how exactly these memories that this stories pertain to, of how these characters might think about the past, feels all the more special in how they sort of grow and evolve as human beings. Yeah, it looks like here that's all the recommendations that I have. So again, I hope that you consider picking any of these up, and if you have any short story recommendations, or short story collections I should say, I would definitely love to know those as well. As always, thanks for watching, and I'll see you next time.